If you're new to the North Precinct Advisory Council, just note that the recording will capture the speakers. So while you can see the gallery, if you've chosen that view, you won't be on the recording unless you choose to speak as we get into the meeting. A reminder that please use the chat feature. If we have time, we try to open up for live questions. We don't always have that time, but we've been pretty good at getting all of the chat questions in. So if you have one, even if you think of it while we have one speaker and it's for the next, go ahead and get it into the chat. We will sort them out. I read them to the speaker so that I will scroll through and try to make sure we get through all of them. So again, use the chat, please. And let's see, a couple other quick things. We always want to thank the Seattle Police Foundation. They provided the grant this year that is paying for our Zoom link, because as a volunteer community group, we have no funding. So we always appreciate that. So thank you, Seattle Police Foundation. You folks see my face a lot, but it's really the whole board that creates and supports these meetings. And that includes Susan Strank, who is our VP and who manages our social media, Andrea Purr, Melinda Jacobson, Diane Vincent, Nancy Rahauser, and Cheryl Bishop. And they are all on tonight. So thanks to all of you. We really appreciate all you do. I also want to call out before we get started with the February meeting that our next meeting, again, we meet the first Wednesday of the month. So next Wednesday, March 5th is our March meeting. And the topic will be a public health approach to gun violence prevention. And the speakers will be the director of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention with Public Health Seattle and King County. So that should be a very interesting meeting. So mark that on your calendar, Wednesday, March 5th. And with that, I am going to go ahead and say thank you to State Representative Lauren Davis, who is our speaker tonight. We appreciate not only her being here tonight, but she is a longtime participant in and supporter of North Precinct Advisory Council. And we brainstormed this meeting based on a conversation that she and I had last fall about making people aware of the public safety bills that are happening in the legislature at the time when you can actually speak to them and speak up to see whether or not those are the things that you want. With that, I will stop talking and say thank you, Representative Davis. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to be with you. So I represent the 32nd Legislative District. I have a relatively small portion of North Precinct. I represent only the neighborhoods of Broadview and Bitter Lake, and then my legislative district goes into Shoreline and South Snohomish County. But I am one of 9 members of the House Community Safety Committee, so 98 members in the House, but relatively small committee. This is my 7th legislative session, and I've served on that committee my entire tenure in the legislature. So I'm deeply involved in those issues, and I'm going to try to run through some bills that I think might be of greatest interest to this group, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and then would welcome anybody's questions about just about anything that you might want to ask about. So let me preface this by saying, unfortunately, there's a decent amount of bills that are being considered before the House Public Safety Committee that, in my opinion, actually harm public safety. And those bills, many of them, not all, are likely to advance out of the committee. So that is, I just want to start with that thematically. I do think it is concerning, and I do think it is discordant with the crime data. I think it's discordant with public sentiment about public safety. There are many bills that I would put in that category, but the first bill I actually want to start with is on the positive side, and I think something that would be of particular interest to your group. It's a bill we just had a hearing on yesterday, and you may have heard of it, House Bill 1265, and that has to do with a criminal offense that is currently known as patronizing a prostitute, which is currently a simple misdemeanor. So, of course, in criminal law, we have a simple misdemeanor, which is punishable by up to 90 days in jail. We have a gross misdemeanor, punishable by up to 364 days in jail. And then we have a felony offense, which is punishable by a year or more, right? So felonies can get you to prison, misdemeanors in jail. And then there's, of course, 3 levels of felonies, A, B, and C. Sorry, I did that in the wrong order. C is the lowest, A is the highest felony. So previously, there had been legislation introduced by my former colleague on the Community Safety Committee, Mike Pelliciotti, to try to increase criminal penalties for patronizing a prostitute. And his bill advanced out of the House and died. I think probably just ran out of time. And then what happened was Mike Pelliciotti got elected as the state treasurer. And so nobody sort of picked up that body of work. And I think that's actually relatively common in the legislature because there's not necessarily an organization or an advocacy group or an entity for whom that is the greatest priority. And it just sort of got lost. It kind of went out the door with him. And fortunately, that has been picked up again. And the legislation from a public safety standpoint is even stronger now. So the bill actually changes the name of the crime of patronizing a prostitute to the crime of commercial sexual exploitation, which frankly more accurately describes what's occurring. It also increases the criminal penalty from a simple misdemeanor to a Class C felony. So it skips actually the step of gross misdemeanor. I will just say, as a general rule, the House Democratic Caucus has been pretty reticent to increase criminal penalties for most things, with a couple exceptions. I will also note that, and there's been a lot of concerns about potentially increasing racial disparities, and that's been one of the concerns driving the reticence to increase criminal penalties. It is also true that the prime sponsor of this bill is a member of the Legislative Black Caucus, and the number 2 sponsor on the bill is part of our Native American caucus. And so I do think that sort of changes the narrative. It's also noteworthy that the criminal defendant type for this particular offense bears no resemblance to criminal defendants for any other category of offense. Individuals arrested for and prosecuted for patronizing a prostitute are overwhelmingly white, employed, married, and not consistent with the demographic. And so I think there's frankly less concern about racial disparity as it relates to that particular population. So wanted to flag that for you. Again, there was a public hearing this last week, yesterday, actually. Moving on to the bills that I think are concerning, and then I'll come back with a few more kind of on that are sort of playing offense, if you will, things that improve public safety. So there are a large suite of bills that would allow the release of individuals in prison early. And there are 4 of them specifically. And they do that through a couple different mechanisms, which I will explain. But the general premise, conceptually, is that to allow people early release. And I will just, I'm a very transparent communicator. I'll lay my cards on the table. I actually believe that some individuals who are sentenced to really, really long sentences, 30, 40, 50 years, particularly if they were sentenced when they're quite young, that it is, in my opinion, appropriate in some cases to take what they call a second look at those cases 20 years later, right? If you were arrested and convicted at 20 and now you're, a 45-year-old man, we have 25 years of data on what that person has done with themselves. Have they had a bunch of infractions in prison? Are they mentoring, younger individuals? Like what are they doing? So I do believe in some narrowly tailored mechanism for early release. I think it's also important to note that early release of any kind, including the 2 mechanisms I'm about to describe, have massive, massive impacts on the victims of those offenses or the victim's surviving family. I think it's also important to note that most of the cases that would be eligible for early release that I'm describing, they're almost all violent crimes, and many of them are homicide offenses, because to be sentenced to long enough to even have this conversation, it's almost exclusively violent offenses. So the overwhelming majority of criminal cases in the state of Washington end in a plea. And that is important to note because if you want a defendant to plead guilty, you need to give them something. And usually what you're giving them is you're allowing them to plead to an offense that's lesser than the actual criminal conduct that they committed. You're often also not including certain aggravating factors, which allow you to sentence a defendant above the standard range, or you're not including certain sentencing enhancements. So we have that's a subject of a different piece of legislation, which I probably won't have time to talk about, but we have certain mandatory sentencing enhancements for a variety of things, primarily firearms. So the prosecution is making a deal with the defendant to a lesser crime for lesser time. And part of the way that victims, I think it's also important to note that victims have basically no say in that, none. I have, went through my own experience. My domestic violence abuser was, I went through a week-long jury trial in Superior Court last fall. So I have fresh experience from that side, but I also have experience walking with victims, including someone from my legislative district, the northern part of our district, whose daughter was murdered and attended the sentencing of her daughter's killer. And that was a plea over the parent's objection. That's actually quite common. And so the victim experiences powerlessness and not being able to be involved, but the victim is at least told, promised, if if they take this plea, the defendant waives their right to appeal, which is true. However, nobody tells them that the legislature of 10, 15, 20 years later might come along and change the rules of the game and toss out the sentence. And so there is a concern, an ongoing concern about the state basically going back on their word, which I think we should not take lightly. And that is true for all of the bills that I'm about to explain. So the other thing before I talk about the bill specifically, I want folks to understand that there's sort of like two primary mechanisms for letting people out of prison early that are being contemplated by the legislature. And one of them I find personally extremely problematic, and one of them I find much more favorable. So one of the types of resentencings, which is two of the four bills, is a true resentencing, meaning you go back before the court that sentenced you and you get a whole new sentence. So what that means is your old sentence is gone, completely gone, bye-bye. So you could have been sentenced to 50 years, 70 years. Originally, they give you a new sentence of, 20 years. And if that person were to get out and recidivate or violate conditions of release, you can't go back and get the original sentence again. I also have concerns about that model of resentencing because I have concerns about a relatively small number of judicial officers in the state who appear to be narrowly focused, exclusively focused on the rights and will and wishes of criminal defendants and without seemingly much, if any, regard for public safety. And the bill provides broad discretion to judicial officers, which would mean that some so-called activist judges would be allowed to make broad sweeping decisions. So I have concerns about the legislature abdicating our authority to the judicial branch to give them basically carte blanche around sentencing. And I'll talk about each bill briefly, but the other type of resentencing is not actually a resentencing at all. It's a mechanism of early release through what's called the ISRB, which is the Indeterminate Sentencing Review Board. So it's noteworthy that Washington State does not actually have parole. We got rid of that in 1981, and we are, in my opinion, that's a problem actually, that we don't have parole for a variety of reasons. And what that means is not really incentive for people who are currently incarcerated to do well, to not get into fights, to engage in programming, to work, to take classes, because there's no mechanism really. We have a little bit of quote unquote earned time, but it's not particularly significant. And so in Washington State, we have what's called a determinate sentencing system, meaning you are sentenced to like X years and that's it. There's no wiggle room. But the ISRB is the Indeterminate Sentencing Review Board. They have jurisdiction over currently, they have jurisdiction over just three populations of people. The first is individuals who were sentenced prior to 1984. So the Sentencing Reform Act that basically disbanded parole passed in 1981, but it was kind of a 3-year transition. So any individual who's currently incarcerated who was sentenced before 1984 was sentenced to these indeterminate sentences where there was a minimum and a maximum. And depending on their conduct, they could be released. And then depending on their conduct when they're released, they could be taken back. That's one population. The second population is individuals who commit a serious violent offense under the age of 18. And then the third type is individuals who commit sex offenses after post 2001. So I'll talk about the two bills that pertain to the ISRB first. Part of why the ISRB, in my opinion, is more attractive is because the ISRB is a function of the Department of Corrections. So the state legislature has significant control over the ISRB. We can control how many members are on it. We can control what type of members are on it. We can compel their training. We can compel their procedures. We can compel what priorities they should give in their release decisions. We cannot do any of those things with the judiciary because of separation of powers. It's a totally separate branch of government. So the deciding actor belongs to the executive branch in this model. Like I said, another one of the benefits of the ISRB model is people can be taken back into custody which they do. It's also noteworthy that individuals who've been released by the ISRB, it's something like a less than 2% rate of recidivism. So they have a very lengthy, it's like a year-long process. The person has to undergo a psychological assessment. There's a ton of work and a ton of eyes on a case. That is not true with the judicial resentencing, where they basically have a defendant in front of them. There's a stack of papers. The victim makes a statement, boom, 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 and they make a decision based on much less information. So the two bills that have to do with the ISRB, the first bill is still alive in the Senate, but the House version is what we call dead. And this bill, my opinion, may be the most problematic bill before our committee. It's House Bill 1111. I can try to look up quickly what the companion bill is. And a companion bill just means that there's an identical piece of paper introduced in both chambers. So in the House, it's called 1111. And then in the Senate, it's going to have a Senate bill number, which is 5266. 5266 is still alive. In fact, it had a hearing before the Senate Budget Committee, Ways and Means, on February 3rd, so this week. This particular piece of legislation, House Bill 1111 or 5266, would allow an individual who committed a serious violent offense, including murder in the first degree, as a juvenile under the age of 18, to petition the ISRB for release at age 24. Now, the reason that the bill proponents are interested in that is because at age 25, you transfer to the custody of the Department of Corrections. So you stay in the custody of the Juvenile Rehabilitation Administration until age 25, and then you transfer. You may have seen in the news, there are a lot of challenges the state is facing with the JRA facilities, overcrowding, fighting, etc. So I understand the premise of trying to avoid the climate and culture of a JRA facility is much more rehabilitative than the prison environment. However, what this would mean is that an individual who was convicted of cold, calculated, planned first-degree murder could have been originally charged as aggravated murder, but there was a plea to first-degree murder when they were 17 years old and 11 months, that they would be potentially released 6 years later. And I don't find that to be reasonable by any objective measure, personally. That bill is dead in the House, but still very much alive in the Senate. The second bill that also pertains to the ISRB, I find less problematic, and I'm had a proposed substitute bill in committee to try to really make it into something, at least that I personally could accept. That's House Bill 1317. And what that does is it would allow individuals who committed offenses at ages 18, 19, or 20 to petition the ISRB for release after 15 years or 20 years if the offense was murder in the first degree. And as I mentioned at the beginning, so these are people who committed a crime at quite a young age. And obviously there's broad science recognizing the lack of full prefrontal cortex development until age 25. And these are people who've served 15 to 20 years at that point. So looking at their conduct and giving an opportunity for a second look. I do find some pieces of that bill flawed also, which I attempted to remedy. That is current law. If you commit murder or other violent offenses under age 18, you are subject to the ISRB. But if you commit the same offense at 18, 19, or 20, you're not. You have a determinate sentence. And some of these people, many of these people actually were sentenced at age 19 or 20 to 71 years, 62 years, like an effective life sentence. So that's House Bill 1317. Of the four, that is the one that I personally am more willing to work with, and I think has some real merit. The next two I find nearly as problematic as House Bill 1111 personally. And again, you're just getting the Lauren Davis unvarnished opinion. Like, I would welcome people's feedback, but one of the next bills is they're both on for executive session tomorrow. So that means they're going to be voted out of committee tomorrow. I will be introducing what's called a proposed substitute. So basically a new bill that would rewrite the bill on both of those bills. But my proposed substitute will be voted down, meaning there's 6 Democrats in the committee. The Republicans will join me and vote yes. The others will vote no. The amendments, my proposed substitutes will not be adopted, and then I will vote no and join the Republicans in doing so. So House Bill 1125, which will be voted out of committee in executive session tomorrow, would allow any individual who's committed any offense except for aggravated murder if you're under 18 when you committed the offense, you could petition not the ISRB but a judge for resentencing after serving 7 years. And so it's not that dissimilar from the first bill I talked about, except it's not even the ISRB. And for anybody who committed a crime after 18, no matter what the offense, except for aggravated murder, you could petition a judge for resentencing after 10 years. So we're talking about intimate partner homicide. We're talking about rape in the first degree with a weapon. We're talking about serious offenses. And we're talking about the other thing that's a problem is when someone is sentenced the first time, we have this thing called the sentencing grid, which I won't bore you with, but it basically is a matrix that looks at the seriousness of your offense and your criminal history to determine your length of sentence. That is true when a person is being sentenced the first time. When in the bill 1125 as written, the judge is supposed to sentence you de novo, which is a legal term that's basically like a blank slate. So the judge can sentence you to whatever that they want, including immediate release. And I just find it to be, you're basically tossing out any plea agreements that were made, any commitments to a victim that were made, any jury decision that was made. So that's that bill. And then there's another bill that I find even more problematic than that, which is House Bill 1274, which is another resentencing bill, resentencing by a judge. The one thing at least about 1125, which I just talked about, at least that bill is resentencing based on merit. The person has to at least show to the judge, I haven't been in trouble in prison. This is what I've been doing. The other bill, 1274, is not based on merit. It's automatic resentencing for any individual currently incarcerated who had their what's called an offender score, which is basically that criminal history that I was explaining that is in that matrix. The higher your criminal history score, the longer your sentence. So the legislature passed a bill 2 years ago that said we're no longer going to count people's juvenile points or juvenile offenses in that criminal history score going forward. This bill says we're going to go backwards for the 14,000 people that are currently incarcerated, and every single one of them who had a juvenile point contribute to their offender score is going to be resentenced. And it is automatic. The only thing that qualifies you to get resentenced under this bill is that in addition to committing serious crimes as an adult, you also committed serious crimes as a juvenile. It's not merit-based at all. And when the judge does the resentencing, there's no latitude. The judge has to sentence you to a brand new sentencing range, which on average is going to be about 10 years less. But again, these could be individuals who have not done the work, who are not rehabilitated. So that's concerning. That was more kind of like on the sentencing thing. There's a number of bills that are being considered that have to do with police practice and kind of immediate law enforcement's ability to do police work that I also think are concerning. One of them is House Bill 1138, which is on its face, I think people respond favorably. It outlaws law enforcement's ability to use deception in what's called a custodial interrogation. The problem with the bill, so people are like, oh, it makes it so police can't lie. But the problem is, if you actually sort of get into the weeds and you understand the purpose of the bill and the proponents of the bill, the goal of the bill is to inhibit law enforcement's ability to do police work and to solve cases and to pursue justice for victims. That is the overarching objective. And I had a fascinating conversation with an individual who's an expert interrogator here in the state of Washington who interrogates primarily homicide suspects and is very interested in these sort of rapport-based methods or empathy-based methods of interrogation. But even he said that you can't just totally, completely eliminate that tool ever. And, generally speaking, we don't tend to make good public policy in these complete absolutes. So that is a bill where it takes the tool off the table entirely. There are other times we've taken the tool off the table entirely recently, and it didn't work out so well. Police ability to pursue a fleeing vehicle, for one example. Law enforcement's ability to interview a juvenile suspect in a homicide or a rape. That's another time we didn't allow for nuance. And so I have concerns about that bill. And then another bill, I think the last one that I'll mention, has to do with traffic stops. And it's House Bill 1512. And the proponents of the bill are arguing that it's about, they call it the traffic safety bill, but it basically inhibits law enforcement's ability about who they can pull over for a traffic stop, and then inhibits law enforcement's ability to question an individual when they pull that person over, and inhibits law enforcement's ability to conduct a search of the vehicle. So again, it is really tying the hands of law enforcement and their ability to do police work, which would be the objective. I do find that highly concerning. There's a police chief, is a longtime friend of mine, told me, I will literally quit being a police officer and leave Washington State if this bill passes. It's the worst of the worst in terms of police work. And then I want to flip to questions here. I'll mention two bills that I'm prime sponsoring that I think are important, that are on playing the offense, kind of trying to promote public safety. One is House Bill 1252, which has a hearing next Thursday. That bill has to do with judicial accountability and requiring judges who are releasing violent defendants and defendants who have eluded police and required, canines and air support to apprehend them, then they're getting released the next day. This legislation requires judicial officers to make written findings about why they're releasing these defendants. We have had some horrific cases, including a Seattle armed robbery case where a defendant, he was released pre-trial for an armed robbery, and 15 days later went and tied a 14-year-old boy to a tree in Everett and disemboweled him. That is egregious, and it's actually not uncommon. There are some pretty, and we have such limited law enforcement resources. We're letting these suspects who take 9, police units to take them into custody, and then they're getting out the next day, and then only to do it again. So that's 1252, making the judicial officers make written findings, trying to create some accountability. And then the other one is House Bill 1688, also has a hearing next Thursday. That is about individuals that are on community custody. So we have also about 14,000 individuals on Department of Corrections community custody. It's not parole, but it's supervision in the community. And we have some real issues with what the Department of Corrections calls persistent violators. So people that are just absconding permanently. And the maximum penalty when those people are found, no matter what they've done, new violent offense, maximum penalty is 2 weeks in jail. There's also the crime of escape from community custody is never prosecuted, basically, because it's not treated seriously in the criminal code. And so this bill increases criminal penalties for escape from community custody. So I'm going to pause there, and I know there were lots of things in the chat, so happy to take any questions.
Before you do that, this is fascinating and hair-raising and overwhelming, and you can tell by looking at the questions in the chat that people are exercised about this and want to know what they can do and how they can do it. But the other thing that I think would be extremely helpful is, does your office have any kind of a summary, a spreadsheet that captures some of this information? Because there's some great stuff. Several folks are putting links in the chat. That's wonderful. But something that captures some of what you just said, is that
Sure.
available?
I mean, certainly, like there's the bill summaries, right? The staff prepare, our nonpartisan staff prepare bill analyses, and they're really great because they tell you the background, which is the current law, and then they tell you a summary of the bill. But like, I could certainly try to put something together like that, what you're like, kind of just a shorter synopsis. I'm happy to try to do that and get that back to you. Realistically, it might be this weekend. It would be probably soonest that I would have capacity, but happy to do that.
You know, I'm going to speak for this group to say, I think that would be incredibly helpful. And I think if it is as simple as listing those bills you just called out and grouping them into, you support these, you modify this one, oppose these, links to the bills, we can read the bills, but even a couple of comments that say what your opinion is would be extremely helpful. And we
Sure,
would
I'm
be
happy to
happy
do
to
that. And I
share
will
that.
just say, like, opinion of one, right? I'm one of 147 lawmakers.
We understand that, but it really is helpful to the average citizen to have a lawmaker actually say directly, this is what I think. So with that, I'm going to look at our chat. Let's see. Okay, again, thanks to Carlos and Susan. You're out there putting in links to the bills. We appreciate that. This is recorded and those links do go out with the recording, so know that you'll get those. Somebody says they'd like to address graffiti and recurring problems on Aurora. Is that something where the legislature can have a role?
I believe there was a bill of graffiti. What I'll do, I know my speaking section ends here shortly. What I'm going to do is I'll loiter in the chat, and I think it lets you reply. So for any questions we don't get to, I'll reply. But I'm virtually certain a colleague of mine across the aisle introduced a bill related to graffiti, which is the only bill that I've currently seen before the legislature that addresses that specifically. I will go scoop it out and stick that in the chat. And then regarding Aurora, I mean, I think as far as the legislature, the bill that most closely addresses the public safety issues is going to be that 1265 that I mentioned related to commercial sexual exploitation. There's also, of course, the work being done from like a transportation safety improvement perspective on the Licton Springs corridor. As I'm sure you're aware, the legislature is a little tight on funds at the moment, but the hope would be that we would bit by bit work on some of those improvements and that we would make our part of Aurora more like the Aurora and the other part of my district, which is Shoreline.
And Shoreline, yes, it's lovely, isn't it? So there's a couple questions of this sort, which is not only who should people reach out to show support or opposition, but what is the best way? Do you have to drive to Olympia? Can you submit email comments? What works
Yeah.
best?
I would say email comments. You can put bill comments that go to your own lawmaker. You can also, I will put the email addresses for the House Community Safety Committee. That's where most of these bills are right now. So even if they're not your lawmaker, they're the ones voting on those bills, right? But I will say for a lot of you, one of them is your lawmaker. So Representative Daria Farivar, who represents, so I've got west of Aurora, north of 107th. But Rep. Farivar, who's she's one of the 6 Democrats on the committee, and she sponsored the House Bill 1111 actually, and so she represents Lake City and Northgate and that whole area. And then we've got another. What is the cutoff for North Precinct? Is it the Ship Canal?
The Ship Canal up to 145th, and then Lake Washington to Puget Sound.
Yeah, okay. So you've also got like the 36 legislative district. You've got others as well. And you have, entirely Democratic lawmakers, so who are the majority party. So I would highly strongly encourage you to contact your own lawmakers. Community Safety Committee, I'll put the emails, but also through the legislative website, it will automatically route you to your lawmakers if you input your address. And commenting on these bills and your personal opinion really makes a big difference. Coming down to Olympia in person is great. Asking for a virtual meeting is also great.
Okay, great. One question, we don't have a lot of time, but are you familiar with the Hope Card? And how does that work? Who's eligible for one?
Yes, let me see if I can have a visual here. I have one here in my wallet. I actually was the 2nd person in the state of Washington to receive a Hope Card. So a Hope Card is it's for individuals that have an active that are of the protected party in an active domestic violence protection order. And victims such as myself are told basically you have to keep your protection order with you. My protection order's, a dozen pages or more, and you've got to have one in your car and one in your purse and one at your kid's school if you have kids and all that. And so the Hope Card is basically a driver's license-esque that allows. And so I was the number 2 sponsor with my Republican colleague, Rep. Griffey, on that bill. It passed a couple years ago. The Hope Cards have now gone live as of January. And even without any advertising, there's already been dozens and dozens issued to survivors across the state who are relieved to no longer have to bear the burden of carrying paperwork around in order to have an order enforced by law enforcement. So smart, simple innovation. I can put a link on the website with more, or on the chat with more information.
That would be great. And again, we're just about at time, but this is a question related to something that you and I talked about when I asked you about presenting. I understood you to say that almost no citizens, individual citizens, go down or email or weigh in on any of these bills. There are interest groups that appear, a couple of interest groups, and most of us don't even say anything or really know about them. Is that correct?
I would say that it's getting better on the people emailing, right? So I would say in my 7 sessions, there's more people submitting like bill comments and such. I mean, which I think is fantastic. There are still very few quote unquote regular people who aren't lobbying for a living who come to the Capitol either to testify on a bill or meet. And that's why it's so important for people to do that. There's groups that have, advocacy days and such, but to come down on your own, it makes a tremendous difference. I mean, it really does. I think, just to be frank, my perspective, a lot of these policies, the ones that I'm concerned about, and I'm a progressive Democrat from the 6th most liberal district, but these concerning policies pass because I think there is a strong perception that is the will of the voters from the districts of these Democratic lawmakers from Seattle and the suburbs. And if that's not accurate, then they need to know that.
That's great. I think that's very helpful. Well, we're at 7:40, so we do need to pause. You offered to stay and lurk in the chat and answer. So folks, you can continue to ask questions of Representative Davis. This has been extremely helpful and eye-opening, and we will reach out to your office, your staff, to facilitate some kind of a summary that we will share with our email list so that folks can understand a little better how to speak up.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Okay, great. Well, doesn't that make you want to just stop right now and just go start writing emails? Okay, but next up, we have Megan Westfall from the City Attorney's Office. Thank you very much, Megan, for being here. And let
Yeah,
me add your spotlight, and you
great.
are on.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Representative Davis, for explaining a lot of those bills. That was really interesting and really eye-opening to me. I know quite a bit about the public safety realm, and I was unfamiliar with some of those bills, so I was glad to get the recap from you. And I know that this group talks a lot about Aurora and the human trafficking and associated violence that we see in Aurora. So I would really urge people to look into the bill. I think it's escaping me, but maybe it was 1256. I believe Representative Davis said that would change the crime of patronizing a prostitute into a Class C felony. That could be interesting to see how that would play out and how that could affect some of the stuff we're seeing in Aurora. So I really appreciated hearing that. Okay, so I just wanted to again introduce myself. I'm Megan Westfall with the City Attorney's Office. I don't have a terribly long update for today's meeting since we were all really fortunate last month to have City Attorney Davidson as the guest speaker. And I thought she did a really great job of talking about a lot of the issues that we're seeing, the projects that the office is undertaking, and really her priorities for 2025 as City Attorney. But since I was aware ahead of time that our topic tonight was going to revolve around legislation at the state level, I wanted to highlight a couple of legislative efforts that the City Attorney's Office has been supporting and opposing. At the last meeting, City Attorney Davison mentioned that she supports House Bill 1228. And I have links for these bills, so you don't have to go ahead and I'll put them in the chat at the end. You don't have to go ahead and scramble for them, which would allow for private labs to conduct testing of forensic blood samples in impaired driving cases. And this would really immediately help to decrease this huge backlog of cases that are waiting to be filed because we're waiting on the state toxicology lab to process these forensic blood samples. It's not their fault. They're understaffed and they are taking samples from the entire state and not just for impaired driving cases, for all sorts of cases where there's any sort of forensic evidence that needs to be tested. But the ability to send this out to a private lab would, like I said immediately kind of decrease that backlog of DUI cases that are waiting to be filed. It would also really tremendously enhance public safety pretty immediately by having some swifter consequences for the people that make the really unsafe decision to drive on our roads while they're impaired. And the city attorney actually wrote an op-ed in the Seattle Times maybe a week or so ago, voicing her support for this bill and kind of going into some more details. And so I'll put a link for that in the chat afterwards as well, when I'm done speaking, if anyone is interested in reading it. There is one bill that the city attorney does oppose, that is House Bill 1113. So this is kind of an interesting bill, and I think it kind of touches on some of the things that Representative Davis was talking about kind of taking away some of the discretion of the prosecutor and of the legislature and whatnot, and placing it in the hands of the judges. So this bill would permit a court of limited jurisdiction, which that's going to be any of your municipal or district courts. So Seattle Municipal Court, which my office practices in, is a court of limited jurisdiction. And it would allow, on motion of either party, so either the prosecutor or of the defense attorney, to request that the court allow the defendant to enter into an agreement for 12 months with certain conditions they have to abide by. During that 12-month period, there's no finding of guilt and the case just kind of teeters along. If the defendant substantially complies with the agreement at the end of the 12-month period, or really at any point, the court shall dismiss any of the charges that are associated in that agreement. And so there's a couple of reasons that the city attorney opposes this legislation. First, this legislation allows for the defense attorney to make this motion to the court for their client to enter into the agreement and enter it over the objection of the prosecutor. And so this is really taking the outcome of the case out of the prosecutor's hands and giving the prosecutor really no say in what they believe an appropriate disposition of the case should be. Second, the agreement mandates dismissal of all charges at pretty much any time, and even if there's only substantial compliance. So this could mean that a case could be dismissed within days or even weeks of entering into the agreement. There's no guarantee the agreement would last for the entire 12 months. And the agreement could also be dismissed, or the charges could also be dismissed even if the defendant doesn't do everything that's required under the agreement. The court would be looking to see if they substantially complied with the agreement. So that means there could be things they we're required to do, such as treatment or not have any new criminal law violations. And non-compliance with that would not necessarily mean that the charges would not be dismissed. So again, it's really just taking the prosecutor out of the equation here. And I just wanted to note the agreements to continue cases for a period of time like this for dismissal of charges or reduction of charges upon completion of certain terms like treatment and things like that. It already exists in municipal court. We use it when it's appropriate, and we do that based looking at the facts of the individual case and looking at the history of the person. And if it's appropriate under those circumstances, then we make that offer as the prosecutor. Again, it's up to the prosecutor to make that offer. We also require that the person fully comply with all of the terms of the agreement in order to get the benefit of the bargain there and get the benefit of the dismissal of charges or the reduction of charges. And so the introduced legislation would take this existing practice and really make it so the prosecutor is not really a part of that process and doesn't have a say in how these cases should go. Okay, so those are the two pieces of legislation that I wanted to highlight and share with the group that we're looking at kind of at the state level. And that's really all I had to update you all on tonight. Are there any questions? I can look at the chat real quick. Let's see.
Megan, quick question. Does your office have a website that's the best place we can point to from when we send out our minutes to folks to find what bills? Are there only the two bills, one support, one oppose?
As of now, those are the only ones that the city attorney's office has taken an official position on. And so we don't, because we only have those two, there's not like an official website. But if City Attorney Davison does take, more stances, and decides to post them publicly, I'll definitely share that information with the group.
Okay.
Were there any other questions? And I will place links to those House bills, and I think Henry might have done that. No, okay, I'll place links to those two House bills and also to the op-ed if anyone's interested.
Okay, let's see if we have, I think you've also been scrolling through. Okay, well, we will perhaps reach out to you just to double check before we push out any update about the legislative bills that are pending, and just check if there's anything else we should include from the city attorney's office, okay?
Definitely. That sounds great. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Okay. Next, joining us tonight, instead of Casey McNerthney, we have Douglas Wagoner, who is following the legislative bills for the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. So thank you for stepping in. We appreciate it. And I know you weren't here for much of Representative Davis's presentation, but as you can see, it's really, I think, all about, what bills does your office support or oppose and why? And we're going to ask you the same question, which is, do you have an organized place that we can point to help people as they listen to you and decide they want to take action?
We absolutely do. And good evening, everyone. I'm Douglas Wagner. I'm the Director of Legislative and Public Affairs at the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. I work really closely with Casey McNerthney. We do have a centralized place where we're hosting online all of our legislative priorities, the top public safety bills that King County Prosecuting Attorney Lisa Mannion is fighting for in Olympia this year. I'll drop that in the chat as soon as I get done talking, so you can take a look at that. And it'll also include links to the bills that I'll highlight for you, so you don't have to also scramble to look them up. I also want to shout out Representative Davis. We're just so grateful for Representative Davis. She is an unwavering champion for crime survivors and for common sense public safety in the Capitol. We're working with her on several bills, and her leadership is really invaluable and frankly refreshing in Olympia. So I just want to shout her out as well. I'm going to share a few of the public safety and crime survivor related priorities that we're working on this year in Olympia. Just last week is when King County Prosecuting Attorney Lisa Mannion released the list of bills that are among her top priorities this year. Her very first priority is resources for crime survivors. Katie's right, I apologize. I joined about halfway through the meeting. So Representative Davis probably already mentioned it, but just in case not, I want to highlight a bill that Representative Davis is leading in the House, and there's a Senate companion as well that's being led by Senator Manka Dhingra. And this is to fund crime survivor services. So things like emergency housing, crisis lines, mobile advocacy, emotional support, trauma counseling, all of the collateral consequences that come when someone is the victim of a crime, things that are not necessarily addressed through the court system. You know, no matter how many just sentences or sentencing decisions come down, there are still collateral consequences that come, as we all know, when someone is a victim of a crime. And the way that this funding works is the majority of it comes from the Victim of Crimes Act through the federal government. It's then funneled to the states. In our state, it goes to the Department of Commerce through their Office of Crime Victim Advocacy. And then it's distributed to nonprofits, community-based organizations all across the state. And some of it goes to prosecutors' offices as well. That funding has decreased by about 90% since fiscal year 2017. So I'll just say that again. It's the funding for crime survivors through the federal government, which is the primary way that our state funds crime survivor services, has decreased by 90% since fiscal year 2017. And we're struggling to make up the gap. The bill that Representative Davis is leading in the House and the Senate companion is among our top priorities this year. King County Prosecuting Attorney Lisa Mannion testified in support of the Senate bill on Monday, and I'll include a link to the chat where you can watch her testimony. You know, this bill is going to provide certainty and resources for crime survivors who rely on these services. I'm also really glad to say that our office teamed up with City Attorney Ann Davison earlier this week. Also on Monday, we sent a joint letter to the governor, to the folks that control the purse strings in Olympia, the House Appropriations Committee, the Senate Ways and Means Committee, in support of crime survivor services, urging them to make crime survivors a priority in the budget process this year. And I'll include a link where you can view that letter, from the joint letter from City Attorney Ann Davison and Prosecutor Lisa Mannion as well. And both of them, this comes on the heels, both of them teamed up on a letter to the federal government just last week, urging Congress to get their act together, because we're in this crisis because Congress has failed to appropriate necessary funds to victim services. The bill that it sounds like Representative Davis mentioned as well, 1265, that would make patronizing prostitution a Class C felony. It would also change the name of the crime to commercial sexual exploitation, which we think is more accurate. I'm really grateful that Representative Davis is sponsoring that bill, and I'm really proud to say that's one of our top priorities this year, to address the demand of Johns that's leading to the trafficking and the related crimes that we're seeing along Aurora. We worked with Representative Stearns and Representative Taylor to actually write that bill. Our human trafficking prosecutors teamed up. We found sponsors in Rep Stearns and Rep Taylor who were willing to prime sponsor the bill. And I was down in Olympia. It was last night. This week is like going by so fast. It was last night, testifying along with our team. Our team testified. I was there in support of that bill, which had a hearing in the House Community Safety Committee. And I was, really proud to be down there to let folks know why it's so important that we raise the penalty, which is now just a misdemeanor, a simple misdemeanor, to at least a Class C felony. This bill would also double the associated fines that come along with, quote unquote, patronizing a prostitute. And we think that's important because those funds, roughly 50% of them, go to local law enforcement to investigate and go after Johns in these crimes. And then the other roughly 50% goes to local services, including services for the survivors of trafficking. And so, this is a bill to go after Johns. this is not a bill to go after the women who are predominantly young women, young people, vulnerable people who are being trafficked along Aurora. This does not raise any penalties associated with them. All this does when it comes to the survivors and the folks who are being trafficked is raise funds through doubling those fees. But it's really aimed at going after Johns. And, you know, because what we're seeing is that when law enforcement hold traffickers accountable, you know, the pimps, new traffickers step in to fill the void. And the associated crimes like the gun violence we see along Aurora just continue. And this cycle is not going to change without new tools to shrink this really lucrative market for commercial sexual exploitation. And so we think this bill is frankly an overdue and a common sense step to shrink the market for trafficking and the criminal activity we're seeing along Aurora.
Douglas, you've got 4 minutes left.
Thank you. Another bill that we're supporting this year that we helped write with Representative Hackney is House Bill 1536. This is aimed at intervening earlier in the criminal justice system when young people are found to be in possession of a firearm. This may surprise folks on the call, but under state law, anywhere in Washington State today, it takes 5 convictions. It takes 5 convictions of unlawful possession of a firearm for a juvenile to be able to be held in secure detention longer than 30 days. So you can be convicted once of unlawful possession of a firearm, twice of unlawful possession of a firearm, a 3rd time, a 4th time, and then it's only on the 5th time that you can actually be held in detention longer than 30 days. We think that's dangerous. We think it's important to intervene with young people far earlier in the process so that they're not just cycling in and out of the criminal justice system with no accountability and also no programming to intervene in their lives. Because if they don't have, you know, leverage hanging over their head, there's really no incentive to change their behavior. And they're certainly not getting a message that this is serious behavior that the justice system takes, you know, very seriously. And so we've introduced a bill, thanks to our prime sponsor, Representative David Hackney, which would change that scheme so that upon the 2nd unlawful possession of a firearm charge, those young people are intervened earlier on and they can be held for longer than 30 days in the justice system. And so that's an important bill that we're working on this year. I know I'm running out of time. I'm just scanning through my list. We continue to support a bill to lower the statewide BAC to 0.05. Again, I'll put more information about that in the chat. We've been supporting that for several years under our chair of our felony traffic unit. This is a bill simply to save lives. Traffic deaths and serious injuries have exploded in King County in recent years. It's a really, really dangerous time to be on the road, and impairment is a key factor in the DUI related, in the traffic related deaths and serious injuries that we're seeing. Any other bills I want to highlight? The bill that Megan mentioned about judicial discretion, the ability to for judges to dismiss certain cases after a certain amount of time. We also oppose that bill, and I've taken a look at that one. I forget the bill number, but Megan mentioned it. Our team also opposes that bill. And I know I only have about 1 minute left, so I think that's good for now. I'll pop into the chat our list of our overall legislative priorities where you can see bill numbers, and we have the links to the bill numbers you can click on. It also includes testimony of a lot of our prosecutors, so you can actually click on the link to the testimony and you can watch them testify and see for yourself how we're showing up in Olympia and what we're fighting for. And then I'll include the link to that letter with City Attorney Ann Davison and King County Prosecuting Attorney Lisa Mannion fighting for crime survivor services, and also her testimony from Monday on that bill.
Great. Thank you very much. I think we are out of time. I think that you've covered things well. And I'm going to ask if, in addition to what you're putting in there, if we can reach out to you as needed as we're putting together sort of a summary of this meeting, which is going to be a little complex because we've covered a whole lot. But we'll make sure we check with you that we've got the things from you and your office accurately captured, okay? Great, thank you very much. All right. Wow, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of in a little bit of information overload. But now it's time for our precinct update. Captain Davison, hello, are you unmuted? Yes, you are.
I believe so, yeah.
And you are on. Now, I have to apologize to folks and to you because normally I try to be kind of organized, and a couple days in advance, I send a list of items we know are kind of out there churning. There are probably things you already have on your list, but you may not have had a chance to see the email I sent you at like
I did.
late afternoon. Great. Well,
I
you are
did see
on.
your email.
The time is yours. Thank you.
All right. So first off, I'll go over the stats. By the way, for those that don't know, I took over the precinct January 1st. So I've been trying to do as much as I can in a short period of time, but there's a long road ahead. So overall crime year to date right now is down in the North Precinct by 18%. Violent crime is down 29%. Shots fired is up 6%. That's actually one incident that raised it. And then property crime is down 17%. And that the trends over the last 28 days are the same. Actually, for the shots fired, there's 0% change over the last 28 days. Specifically, some of the other areas, burglaries down 24% year to date, and motor vehicle theft is down 34%. And these are all North Precinct specific numbers. Let's see. Rape is down 30%, robbery is down 31%, aggravated assault down 28%. So overall total violent crime is down 29% in the north end. Property crime is also down. I think I've said 18%. I can break that down as well. With burglaries being down 24%, thefts being down 10%, and motor vehicle theft being down 34%. So I want to pull up your agenda here. We've been trying to make some strides in the north end. Give me 1 second. I wanted to pull up your agenda so I could hit the topics that you wanted me to hit. So one of the things that you wanted me to talk about was the North Seattle, Northeast Seattle, and Magnuson Park and Mercy Housing, the crime that has been going on around that area. I have been meeting several times down there. So I did do a business walkthrough with the mayor and the mayor's representatives. We started off in some of the businesses in that area, and then ultimately ended up in the Wedgwood area as well, and had chats with business owners in the areas regarding what can be done and how we can improve kind of the ability for people to feel safe in that area and address some of the crime that's been going on. One of the requests was that the mobile precinct be placed down near Magnuson Park, and we had that down there on the 29th. And it's staffed 24/7 at this point in time with 2 officers, and that'll be there for at least a week or two. Again, we can't staff it there 24/7, indefinitely due to logistics, and having 2 officers down there in the mobile precinct are 2 officers that can't respond to calls throughout the North Precinct. So it's more of a temporary situation at this point in time, but it also takes logistics, fuel as well. So we have to pull it back occasionally to refuel it and bring it back down. So, excuse me. I also went down the other day with the mayor's representative as well, down to speak to the Mercy Housing group. And we had conversations regarding kind of the people that are living there at this time, what kind of issues that they were having. I know that they have hired a private security guard that walks around Mercy Magnuson as well. It's a person that's been happening since September. There's one person in uniform that's walking around down there that is not a police officer, but private security that they've hired to address some of the concerns that they've had. The next thing that you wanted me to talk about was Aurora. So some of the things that we've done over the past month, I've reached out to our vice unit as well as our community response group, our CRG, and have asked them to provide additional enforcement in the north end as much as possible. So our vice unit has agreed to try to do at least 2 operations a month up here addressing the vice operations or the vice concerns on Aurora. Our community response group, CRG, is trying to hit up here at least once a week along Aurora, as well as in the Sandpoint, not Sandpoint, but Lake City area to address some of the crimes there. And then we also had, so on January 29th, we had an organized retail theft operation up here as well on Ulta, at Ulta on Aurora, as well as Amazon Fresh on Aurora, to address some of the theft that's been going on, some organized retail theft there. They made 6 arrests that day related to some of the crime that's going on there. And then the next day was the vice operation, where we ultimately, I say we, collectively, the Seattle Police Department arrested 9 people in about, I would say about 4 to 6 hours. I was present during the first 3 hours and observed the first 6 arrests, and ultimately I had to go home. So, but I was there during those. They actually had a city attorney as well that was involved in the incident. In other words, he was observing the operation as well to see how we can improve and potentially progress the prosecution related to John arrests. Yeah, I will move on from there. I know that one of the comments or one of the requests was to talk about the Dodge Durango suspect arrest. So I'll bring that up as well. So a lot of you are familiar. I know it was brought up on the last NPAC meeting that the suspect that had the rolling shootout in the north area, starting on Aurora, about 107 in Aurora. Ultimately, that same individual was involved in a shooting down in the south end. Some probable cause was developed, and our SWAT team was able to go in and ultimately arrest that individual and book him into jail. So more should be coming out about that, but he was booked in for multiple crimes. And then we also had the Baker Park murder that happened since the last NPAC. That suspect was also arrested by our homicide unit, SWAT, as well. And then another arrest that was recently made was in relation to the Jeep Grand Cherokee that was shooting at the Maserati that was off of Green Lake, I believe. That suspect was also identified, and that suspect was also arrested and booked into jail. So there have been some really good developments related to follow-up and SPD making some pretty significant arrests. So with the Dodge Durango, I know a firearm was recovered. There were 2 firearms recovered when they arrested the suspect from, I believe, 2 firearms. I don't want to misquote that. There was a firearm, at least a firearm was recovered from the suspect that was arrested related to the Jeep Grand Cherokee as well. So I'm checking your notes here to see if there's anything else. One of the things that you wanted me to talk about were impacts, if any, on SPD, on the current freezing weather response time impacts. At this point in time, I mean, the snow hasn't really affected SPD as much. I mean, we have to take it a little bit slower for sure. Anytime that we have ice on the road, response times will likely go up a little bit, because if we get in an accident getting there, then we're not going to be able to help. So I I think, oh, one additional question that you wanted me to address was, have I met the new chief, Chief Barnes? Yes, I have. Now I have met him on 3 different occasions. One was when the mayor was introducing him. We had a get together there to welcome him to the city of Seattle. A lot of city leaders were there as well, including council members, judges, lawyers, several command staff members as well. And then the next day we had an all captains meeting and had a discussion with him at that point in time, just to kind of introduce ourselves. And then today we had our CSTAT meeting where we kind of discuss the goings on in the department in a larger room where we have a lot of command staff as well as representatives from all the different precincts, as well as some of the investigative units. And we go over kind of what needs to happen on the department, how we address certain types of crimes. Each captain can discuss what's going on in their area, and that way other captains can give feedback and ways that they might address it, or how we can work on, you know, the crime situation together. So one of the questions was impressions. So far, I mean, I don't have, I mean, he seems like a very nice person. I will also give the fact that today he set out kind of his 4 priorities for us, and kind of laid out where we're going to kind of go from here on out, and provide training throughout the department so that we can get better. So his 4 priorities that he mentioned today were crime prevention, community partnerships, retention and recruitment, and employee safety and wellness. So those are his 4 priorities that he gave to us today. And ultimately he'll be talking more on that and giving us more information and feedback on that as we go along. So last thing on your agenda, and then I'll open it up to whatever you want to talk about, is the hot cocoa with a cop. Unfortunately, I could not go to that because I was meeting with the chief at that meeting that I was just talking about. But my understanding, it was a very well attended event. I was told that there were about 150 people there. I had crime prevention there. I also had our ops lieutenant, our new ops lieutenant, Lieutenant Garth Green, excuse me, Garth Haynes. And then also our second watch lieutenant was there, Lieutenant Thorpe. So they were able to talk to the community members there and answer questions as they came up. So my understanding, it was a very well attended and very well liked event.
Great, thank you very much.
You're
right, I attended, it was lovely. Nice to have a chance to talk to folks directly. Let's see, what have we got in questions? So CJ asks, what happened with this mini rival gang rolling shootouts around Aurora between 107th and up on the side streets, which ND are calling pimp wars? Are you familiar with that?
So that was the 107 in Aurora. That was the Dodge Durango and the other vehicle. So that suspect was arrested. So regarding the other vehicle, I don't know if they've identified that. I do not have that information at this time. If Vice has that, or if our gun violence reduction unit has that, then they'll be working on.
It does seem to have stopped, but there
Who's that?
was just a series with different cars. I'm CJ. Hi. Yeah,
Okay.
series with different cars involved. So, and different, there were women and men involved, but they didn't see, they also were terrible shots. Seems like there was a lot of shooting, but not a lot of hitting, which was a good thing, I think. But wasn't it 2 groups, or you're talking about one individual?
I'm talking about a specific incident where we had a Dodge Durango shooting at another vehicle. They were exchanging gunfire for about 13 minutes. Well, not 13 minutes was the whole incident that was recorded. Ultimately, the vehicles sped off eastbound, trying to shoot towards each other. Again, the suspect in that white Dodge Durango was then a couple days later involved in a shooting in South Seattle. So
So this was a series of shooting, and I believe it was before you came along. So maybe it was a little bit before your time, and it's not all that important. Though in the community, there's been a question of whether we still have undercover, or whether SPD has an undercover drug unit. I see a lot of complaints on Nextdoor about just embedded drugs sellers in different apartments, and so, the information, like, do you guys have an undercover unit? Is there a place of like, I know there's guys dealing drugs. People want to know. And of course, they don't want to just, if they're embedded in the apartment, they don't want cops just showing up to their door, but they still would like to report. You know what I mean? Because it's a little dangerous.
It sounds like, CJ, we might need to follow up on this a little more next month. Is that correct? That we can, a couple of your questions might need follow up.
Well, I can answer a couple of those. We do have our community response group, our CRG. They do undercover stuff occasionally. For the most part, they are uniformed and they respond. They can also go out on bikes. We also still have our narcotics unit. Our narcotics unit generally doesn't deal with street level narcotics. They're going after the people that are delivering large quantities of drugs. So the street level crime that you're kind of describing ultimately is going to be our community response group and our narcotics unit if if it is a higher level. So
I appreciate that. And if we have seen like a reduction in overdoses on the street and on the news, some pretty major drug busts, and that's made a difference.
Okay.
It has.
We are going to move on to our next question now. Max asks, we've had a rash of crimes in View Ridge over the past few months. The mayor suggests that Magnuson Park is the primary driver of this crime. What is happening there? This is something we've talked about a little bit with Captain Agard, and you're familiar with some of it, I know.
Yeah, so I did meet with the Mercy Housing representatives, including the president of Mercy Housing, yes. And my understanding is they've evicted, as of last year, they evicted 3 people from their building. They're having a lot of difficulty evicting people because of the processes in Seattle. My understanding is they're trying to evict at least half a dozen people at this point in time. But those processes are at least 120 days, if not longer, and they often get kicked back from the courts for one reason or another. And they said some of these people they've been trying to evict for years. So the court process is a difficult one for them to deal with at this point in time, but they are in the process and they are trying to work on it. And I did meet with the mayor's representative, Natalie, as well during this meeting. So they're trying to improve some of the areas around. They're trying to get funding to replace some of the doors. And that's a problem because they're all kind of custom doors because it's an older building. So it's going to cost a lot of money for them to replace the doors and help with the security at their own facility. But they, like I said, they did hire private security as well to kind of patrol their complex. And then, yeah, I think that's it. Go ahead.
Okay, another question from Diane is, folks, if you go ahead and put your questions in the chat, that would be great. Diane asks, she says, I've seen video of the new chief state that he likes the care department, but doesn't want to pay for it. And she finds that very concerning. Have you also heard that? And
I saw that interview. I think that what he's trying to say is he wants to make sure that our department is funded. I don't necessarily want to speak for him. And I do know that the care unit has a very large budget as well. So I think what he's saying is he wants to make sure that the funding for the police department is for the police department and the care unit is funded by the city already. They're a separate budget. So I think that that's what he's trying to say. He's in support of the unit because it does provide options for law enforcement as well to provide alternatives to people. So
right.
I think that was kind of taken wrong, but I do know that they have a budget and they are independent of the police department. So
that may be something that people aren't always familiar with. And they have not yet been well and placed into the North Precinct, which is the next question. Has the care team unit advanced in the North Precinct as of now?
So they did start in the North Precinct. So they are, I just heard them on the radio a few minutes ago. So officers are requesting care whenever they're needed, or whenever they can respond. So I don't know if people are familiar with care and how they respond, but ultimately the situation has to either be handled by law enforcement already, in other words, made the scene safe, or if there's calls where you have the same person that's caused an issue multiple times in the past and is not considered a danger, meaning a physical danger, then dispatch can dispatch care directly. And then if they need backup, then police will come. But oftentimes police will go first, make sure it's safe, and then request the care team to come in and complete that call. So yes, they are working in the North Precinct. They have not, other than at the University of Washington, they have their own branch there. They're ultimately going to have a branch here as well at the North Precinct, not in the precinct, but close by. And they will have care team working out of here as well, in addition to our community service officers. So they are working directly out of the precinct right now.
And I see CSO Jane Dorr adds to that the care team works in the North Precinct now, starting at noon. Right now, there is one car with 2 care members. I believe they work noon to 10 p.m. 4 days a week. So that's great. Let's see. I think that there's questions about it's from Yvonne. I think they relate to the Mercy housing and the eviction, and she's got some details here about evictions, but that might be a little more in depth than we can address here from the captain.
I do know that regarding the evictions, I do know that the mayor's representative was there, and so she was going to bring some information back and work on that aspect. I mean, we can work on the criminal aspects, trying to prevent the crime or stop the crime, but ultimately the eviction process is well out of the realm of the police department. So
great. This is one from Sarah, and I know this is a big question for a lot of folks around Greenwood and Aurora. There's still a lot of horrible and dangerous driving and other behavior from pimps and johns throughout our neighborhood right along Aurora. The community is strongly advocating for adding barriers between residential streets and Aurora to keep highway behavior on the highway instead of speeding into residential areas, much like the very successful barrier on 101st in Aurora. Are you supportive of this effort, given it will make it easier to enforce goings-on along Aurora?
I honestly haven't been here long enough to have an opinion on that. I do believe that regarding the crime, I mean, we can respond to the crime. We can try to prevent it as much as possible with presence, but the actual preventing it from going out into the neighborhoods, that's a little bit more, I would say, along the lines of the mayor's office and working with SDOT and things like that to get those structures up. So I do know that in the University District, they've shut down one of the alleys for certain operations or for drug activity, which doesn't necessarily stop the crime. It ultimately just pushes it out. So, but yeah, I'll just leave it at that at this time.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, a lot of talking about tenants. It sounds like SDOT, the mayor's site needing to get things approved by SPD and Seattle Fire Department both. So it's a little bit of a circular conversation, it sounds like. But okay, folks.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The one thing I know that Chief Agar, when she was here, was talking about partnering up with the Parks Department to address some of the Magnuson Park issues.
Yes.
Before they become an issue. I do have a meeting with the Parks Department next week to discuss that, and I've already gotten a hold of our legal unit as well to see if we can go ahead and get an MOA or MOU in place that allows for Parks Department to fund some of the officers with a similar model that Captain Agar was mentioning that we use at Golden Gardens during the summer. So that is in process. I'll be speaking with them on Monday and seeing what the next steps are.
That's great. So one question here, a follow-up from Max, is that it's not clear to him why the focus is on Magnuson. Is the issue that the 6 to 9 unevicted people are the cause of the rash of crimes? And you know, there's folks who have not attended before. I know Max this is his first time. And although it was before your time, I think maybe, can you touch on some of the activity last summer with the noise and the sort of gangs and parties at Magnuson? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with it. I will say that while we're talking about the Magnuson housing, the vast majority of people that are living there are law-abiding, just trying to provide for their family. So we're not talking about Magnuson housing as though it's, you know, the worst place in the world. That's not even what we're doing. Just specifically talking about, you know, issues that they've had regarding certain tenants. That's it. Regarding what's happened in the past, from my understanding, last summer there were, in previous summers, there's a lot of partying, a lot of get-togethers, and potential gang activity that happens in the park itself. I know that Captain Agard deployed the mobile precinct down near the entrance to Magnuson Park when all of this was happening to kind of dissuade people from going into the park that were there for nefarious activities. So there has been an ongoing decision to address the park before it becomes a larger issue. So as the temperatures heat up, more people come out and do things that they shouldn't be doing in the park. But the park itself, it's beautiful. My son has played baseball there. I mean, it's a gorgeous park, and hopefully we can maintain it and keep it beautiful. But with regards to partnering with the Parks Department, a lot of that is funding as well, and being able to pay for our officers to be down there to assist parks in patrolling their park. So
Great. So we have a couple comments thanking you. Fremont and Ballard Crown Hill thanks you. They say you're a great addition. We have somebody asking if you can share your philosophy of policing and just a brief amount of your background.
Sure. I have been on the department now for 24 and a half years. I went to the University of Washington, got my degree there. Then I became a police officer about a year later. I applied right out of college, but was told that I needed more life experience. So I went and worked at Amazon.com for a year, just taking phone calls, helping people. I wish I would have bought some stock back then, because there were only 3 tabs at the time. So you had the music tab, the video tab, and the books tab. That was it. Ultimately, we've turned into this massive store. So if I would have had a business mind at the time, I would have bought stock, and I would have still become a police officer, because this is what I wanted to do. When I was in the University of Washington, I initially was a biology major. I wanted to follow in the footsteps of my brother and ultimately potentially become a doctor. I took several classes, and I just realized that wasn't my route in life. I went on a ride-along as part of a sociology course that I took, and it was in the North Precinct of all places. I loved it and decided I wanted to do another ride-along on my own that was not required. After my second ride-along, I was like, I know what I want to do with my life. So I switched my major to sociology with a minor in society and justice, got my degree, applied to the police force. Then after a while, I decided that I wanted to get more education. So I went to the Seattle University, and I got my master's there in criminal justice with a focus in investigative criminology. Then I started to promote and advance. I did 8 years First Watch East, a year Third Watch East. Then I went to the North Precinct as a burglary theft detective up here. I was here for about a year, and then they abrogated my position, put me back on patrol because of city budget cuts. So I worked North Precinct, Nora sector, and Union sector for a year on Third Watch, and then I went back up to burglary theft for another 2 years before getting promoted. And I went West Precinct, then to the FIT unit for 6 years, force investigation team, then audit policy and research as a lieutenant, promoted in SPOT as a captain, and then I became the firearms captain, and now here. So,
Wow.
and then yeah, just a little bit of running around there. But I do have a connection to the North End. I did live up here for 5 years as well when I was going to the University of Washington. So I do have kind of a fondness for the North End, and I love the fact that it's so diverse and there's so many different communities and micro communities up here. It's kind of a fun. Somebody asked me the other day how I feel about this new position, because it is a giant work pill. And when I say that, I mean, if this were its own city, it'd be the 3rd largest city in the state. So meaning just the North End. So by population, it's a huge amount of work, but I really feel re-energized and refocused in my career, which is awesome. I feel like I'm doing what I was meant to do at this point in time. So hopefully it'll continue. My feel on police work came from my first FTO when we were going along Broadway in the East Precinct, and he kicked me out of the car and told me that I wasn't allowed to get back in the car until I walked the length of Broadway and talked to everybody I came in contact with. And I was like, well, what do I talk to him about? And he said, I don't care. Engage in conversation, because that's what police work is. It's developing those relationships and having communication skills that are outside of just being a police officer. So from then on, I've tried to reach out whenever I was in patrol and I was patrolling myself. I would get out of my car and I'd go talk to people in businesses on the street, trying to engage with people on a daily basis rather than just responding to calls. So I believe that I know that we can't do it alone. We're very few now, I will say, compared to where we were several years ago. And so without community partnerships and relationships, there's no way that we can address all the crime and all the goings on, or even have the knowledge of what's going on out there without people talking to us and having those relationships. So
That's great. Well, thank you. And that's why we keep showing up and have for many, many years. We will continue to. So thank you. And of course, at some point, we're going to start asking you those other uncomfortable questions like, do you think that the North Precinct should be split in two because it's so large? And how do you like that lovely building that you all have to, don't we call it the swamp or something? So you don't have to answer those tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fine. I can answer them at any point in time. I'll wait to answer them.
That's right. We're at time. So thank you. We're glad you're here. So a reminder to folks, we will be sending out information about all of the speakers we've had. There's going to be a lot, so we'll get it put together. The chat comes along with the recording, so all the links will be in there. So once we send that out in just a day or so, you can find everything. Thank you to all of you who have been so great at popping information and links into the chat. That's really helpful. I just want to remind you again that our next meeting is the first Wednesday of March. It's Wednesday, March 5th. The Office of Gun Violence Prevention with Seattle and King County Public Health. So that should be another interesting meeting. And I think with that, we're going to call time. And we appreciate you all coming on this cold and blustery night. See, Zoom does have a place. It's a good thing we didn't have to go out. Thank you all for coming. And if the board would stay on after I stop this recording, that would be great. Thank you all very much.